Let me ask you something. Have you ever made a decision and had absolutely no idea why you made it? You just knew. Maybe it was the house you bought, the one that didn't make sense on paper, but felt like home the moment you walked through the door. Maybe it was the person you married. You'd only known them a few weeks. Everyone thought you were mad, but something inside you said, this is the one. Or maybe, and I suspect this is closer to the truth, maybe it was the other kind. The job you didn't take. The conversation you didn't have. The thing you always meant to do, but never quite did. And now, sitting here today, you wonder, what if I told you that those decisions, every single one of them, weren't made by the part of you that you think is in charge? What if the version of you, sitting in meetings, cooking dinner, paying the bills, is only a tiny fraction of who you actually are, and the real decision maker, the one running the show, has been operating in the shadows your entire life? You've never met it properly. You've never been introduced, but it knows everything about you. And today, I want to tell you a story about a man who discovered this the hard way, at an age when most people had already given up. His name was Arthur, and what happened to Arthur, I promise you, will change the way you see yourself forever. Arthur was 63 years old, sitting in a car park in Swindon, England, eating a ham sandwich. This is not a glamorous beginning, but it's an honest one. He'd just come from a meeting with his bank, a meeting he'd been putting off for 4 months. The short version? His small printing business, the one he'd run for 22 years, was finished. The big supermarkets had started, printing their own leaflets. The internet had taken the rest. And Arthur, being Arthur, had refused to believe it until the numbers made it impossible to ignore. He was 63. He had a modest pension. His wife, Barbara, had passed away 2 years earlier. His daughter lived in Melbourne, Australia, a long way away, and he sat there, in that car park, eating a slightly stale ham sandwich, thinking, what on earth do I do now? Now, here's what I want you to notice about this moment, because you may recognize it. Not the exact details, of course. Maybe your crisis wasn't a printing business. Maybe it was a diagnosis, a divorce, a retirement that felt less like freedom and more like falling off a cliff. But that feeling of sitting somewhere very ordinary, a car park, a kitchen table, a doctor's waiting room, and realizing that the life you'd been living had quietly ended, and nobody gave you a map for what comes next. That's where Arthur was, 63 years old, a ham sandwich, and absolutely no idea. Now, here's where the story gets interesting, because Arthur wasn't the type to do unusual things. He was a practical man. He liked cricket. He read the newspaper, the actual paper, not the online version. Thank you very much. He was deeply suspicious of anything that smelled like self-help or positive thinking. His late wife, Barbara, had once bought him a book called Unlock Your Inner Power. He'd used it to prop up a wonky table leg for 3 years. So when Arthur got home that evening, made himself a cup of tea, and found a small envelope on his doormat with no stamp, no return address. You'd think he'd throw it straight in the bin. He almost did, but something stopped him. He opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten, neat, careful letters, the kind people used to write before everyone typed everything. It said, Arthur, I know you don't know me, but I know the question you're carrying. Meet me at the Anchor Pub on Thursday at 6. Bring nothing. Expect nothing. But come. No name. No explanation. Arthur read it twice. Then he put it on the kitchen counter, made another cup of tea, and thought, quite reasonably, "This is ridiculous." He went on Thursday. The Anchor was the kind of pub that hadn't changed since 1987. Low ceilings, real ales, a fruit machine in the corner that nobody ever won on. Arthur had been going there since he was 30. He almost didn't recognize the man sitting in the far corner. He was older than Arthur, mid-70s, perhaps. White-haired, small, the kind of man you'd walk past in a supermarket without a second glance. But his eyes were extraordinarily alert, like a person who had slept very well for a very long time. Arthur sat down. "You sent me that note," Arthur said, not a question. "I did," the man said. His name, it turned out, was Henry. "How do you know my name?" "Your wife told me about you years ago, before she passed." Arthur went very still. "Barbara knew you?" "She did. We met at a reading group in Cirencester about 6 years ago. She was a remarkable woman. She worried about you. You know, she said you had the most extraordinary mind she'd ever encountered, and absolutely no idea what to do with it." Arthur didn't know what to say to that. So he did what Englishmen do in moments of confusion. He picked up his pint. "What do you want?" he said. The old man smiled. "I want to tell you something that Barbara wanted you to know. Something she was going to tell you herself before she got ill. Something that, if you actually listen to it, will almost certainly change the second half of your life." Arthur looked at him for a long moment. "I'm 63, he said. "I'm not sure I have much of a second half left." The old man laughed, a genuinely warm sound. "Arthur," he said, "you have absolutely no idea how wrong you are." "Let me ask you something," Henry said. "In your printing business, 22 years, how many decisions did you make per day?" Arthur shrugged. "Hundreds, I suppose." "And how many of those decisions did you consciously think through?" Well, most of them." Henry tilted his head. "Are you sure?" Arthur thought about it, the way he'd always known which clients to trust, the way he'd sensed, before a project even began, whether it would go well, the way he'd once turned down a contract that looked perfect on paper, turned it down for absolutely no logical reason, only to discover 6 months later that the company had gone into administration. "Some of them," Arthur admitted, "maybe neuroscientists," Henry said, "estimate that 95% of all human decisions are made below conscious awareness. The thinking brain, the part you believe is in charge, is responsible for about 5% of your behavior." Arthur stared at him. 5%, Henry repeated, calmly. "Everything else, your habits, your instincts, your gut feelings, the way you react when someone cuts you up in traffic, the reason you woke up at 3 this morning and couldn't get back to sleep, all of that comes from somewhere else entirely." "The subconscious," Arthur said flatly. "The subconscious," Henry agreed, "though I prefer to think of it differently." "How do you prefer to think of it?" Henry picked up his glass, set it down again. "I think of it," he said carefully, "as the version of you that has been paying attention this entire time, while you were busy living your life, worrying about invoices and school runs and whether the boiler needed replacing. This part of you was quietly taking notes, filing things away, making connections, building something." He leaned forward slightly. "And now, Arthur, now that the noise has stopped, it's trying to tell you something." Arthur looked down at his pint. "What if I don't want to hear it?" he said quietly. And Henry looked at him with those remarkable eyes and said, "That, my friend, is exactly what I thought 30 years ago, sitting in a pub not entirely unlike this one, after losing everything." Arthur was quiet for a long moment. "Tell me," he said. Henry had been an engineer, A good one. Glasgow trained, meticulous, proud. At 44, his marriage had ended. His business partner had taken everything. He'd ended up in a one-bedroom flat in Bristol with a second-hand sofa and a truly spectacular collection of grudges. I was furious, he said. For about 2 years, I was absolutely furious at my ex-wife, at my former partner, at the economy, at God, occasionally, for variety. Arthur nodded. He understood fury. And then, Henry said, something happened, something very small and very strange. He'd been sitting in his flat one evening, not doing much of anything, when he'd noticed a piece of paper on his kitchen table. He'd been scribbling on it, absent-mindedly, while on the phone. He didn't even remember writing it. It was a design, rough, just pencil lines, but unmistakably the design for a product, a very specific kind of product, an adaptive tool for people with limited hand mobility to help them turn taps and door handles. He had no idea where it had come from. I'd been visiting my mother in the care home, he said, for months, watching her struggle with ordinary things, but I hadn't consciously decided to solve it. I hadn't sat down and thought, right, what's needed here? I'd just visited, felt helpless, gone home, but something in him had kept working, without being asked, without being directed. While he was busy being angry, that little sketch, that piece of paper, became a product. The product became a small business. The small business, eventually, became a company that was acquired 11 years later for more money than Henry had ever imagined possible. But here's what I want you to understand, Henry said. I didn't create that idea. It was already there. It had been forming, slowly, in the part of me that never sleeps. I just had to get quiet enough to hear it. Arthur was very still. How? He said. How do you get quiet enough? Henry smiled. That, he said, is the question Barbara hoped you'd ask. I'm going to tell you 3 things, Henry said. They're going to sound very simple. So simple that a part of you is going to dismiss them immediately. I'm 63, Arthur said. I've earned the right to be skeptical. Excellent. Skepticism is fine. Just stay curious. That's all I ask. The first thing, Henry said, is this. Stop filling the silence. Arthur looked at him. When did you last sit? Henry asked. With no radio, no television, no newspaper, no podcast, no phone, and simply nothing? Arthur couldn't remember. Most of us, Henry said, are terrified of silence. We fill it the moment it appears, because in the silence, things surface, things we've been pushing down, feelings we don't want to feel. Yes, sometimes. That's uncomfortable. But also ideas, memories, connections, the quiet voice that's been trying to get your attention for years. The subconscious doesn't shout, Arthur. It whispers, and you cannot hear a whisper in a room full of noise. 20 minutes each morning, immediately after waking. No phone, no news, a cup of tea if you like. Just sit. Let thoughts come and go, like clouds. Don't grab them. Don't push them away. Just observe. It'll feel useless for the first week, Henry said. Then something will shift. The second thing, Henry said, is to start writing things down. Not journaling, exactly. Not the Dear Diary, today I felt sad variety. Something more specific. Every evening, just before bed, write down 3 things. 1. Something you noticed that day that surprised you, however small. 2. A problem you haven't solved yet, written as a question. Not, I have no money, but how might I create income in a way that uses what I already know? The subconscious, Henry explained, responds to questions the way a search engine responds to a search. Give it a vague complaint, and it returns nothing. Give it a specific question, and it gets to work. 3. Anything that felt like a nudge, a name that came to mind, a fragment of a dream, a feeling in your chest when you thought about something. Don't analyze it, just record it. You are, Henry said, essentially leaving messages for yourself. For the part of you that keeps thinking while you sleep. Arthur thought about the dreams he'd been having lately. Strange ones, old friends, places he'd worked as a young man. He'd dismissed them as just dreams. What if, Henry said carefully, they were less random than you think? The third thing, Henry said, is the hardest one. He paused. Stop arguing with what you already know. Arthur frowned. Somewhere in you, Henry said, quietly, there's already an answer to the question you came into this pub carrying. You've always known, somewhere, what the next chapter looks like, but you've been talking yourself out of it, calling it unrealistic, too old, too late, too strange. He looked at Arthur steadily. What is it, the thing you already know? And Arthur, who is not an emotional man, who had not cried since Barbara's funeral, who genuinely distrusted anything that resembled a heart-to-heart. Arthur felt something shift, very quietly, in his chest, because he did know. He'd known for months. He just hadn't let himself say it out loud. 3 months later, Arthur drove to Bristol, to a small community center on the edge of the city that ran programs for elderly residents. He walked in carrying a box of samples, because what Arthur had been thinking about for years, in the back of his mind, without ever admitting to himself, was that there was a gap between the older generation and printed, physical things. Letters, proper photographs, personalized cards, and memory books. Everything digital now, everything screens. And the older people he knew, his neighbors, his mother's friends, the people at Barbara's reading group, they were drowning in it, overwhelmed, left behind. And Arthur knew how to print. He'd been doing it for 22 years. The new business was small, deliberately so, he called it. Printed with care. He specialized in one thing, helping families create printed memory books for elderly relatives. Photographs, stories, letters from grandchildren, things you could hold in your hands, things that didn't need Wi-Fi. Within 8 months, he had more orders than he could handle. Within 18 months, he'd hired 2 part-time staff. And 3 years later, when a journalist from the local paper came to interview him, she asked the question everyone asked. How did you come up with the idea? Arthur thought for a moment. Then he said something that surprised her. He said, I didn't come up with it. I just finally got quiet enough to hear it. Now, I want to speak directly to you for a moment. Not to Arthur, not to Henry, to you, because you came to listen to this today for a reason. And that reason is probably not purely intellectual curiosity. You're carrying something. Maybe it's a question you've been sitting with for a while. Maybe it's a feeling that this chapter of your life, retirement, or illness, or loss, or simply the strange displacement of life changing beyond recognition, isn't quite what you imagined. Maybe you feel, as Arthur felt, that the map has run out. Here's what I want to leave you with. The subconscious mind, your subconscious mind, has been with you your entire life. Every experience you've ever had, every person you've ever loved, every job, every failure, every ordinary Tuesday that somehow mattered. It's all in there, filed, connected, working. It doesn't retire. It doesn't slow down. It doesn't care how old you are. It is, right now, working on something. The question is whether you'll get quiet enough to hear what it's trying to tell you. You don't need a guru. You don't need an expensive course. You don't need to reinvent yourself. You need 20 minutes of silence, a notepad, and the courage to stop arguing with what you already know. Arthur was 63 when he sat in that car park in Swindon, eating a slightly stale ham sandwich. He thought his story was over. He was wrong. And if any part of you suspects, quietly, in the back of your mind, in the place that never sleeps, if any part of you suspects that yours isn't over either, I'd trust that. I'd really trust that. Thank you for listening today. If this story stayed with you, if something in it nudged, something in you, I'd gently encourage you to try just one thing this week. Sit in the silence for 20 minutes. Write down the question you're carrying and notice what surfaces. You might be surprised. Actually, I think you will be. Take care of yourselves. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone sitting in their own version of a car park, eating their own slightly stale sandwich, perhaps pass it along. You never know whose Barbara sent them here.